Hello, everyone. My name is Ferran Perez Mena, and I'm an assistant professor of international relations of East Asia at the Department of the School of Government and International Affairs. So I'm going to tell you what we're going to do today. So for maybe like 10 minutes or so, I'm going to briefly talk about the department and what's experience of studying in SGIA. And then for the rest of the session, we're going to have an academic taster session, which basically is going to be a kind of like a seminar. So you will be able to experience online how we teach our seminars in the department. Okay, so I'm going to start, let me see, with, yeah, sorry, there you go. So what I'm going to start with information about the School of Government and International Affairs. So basically, the school is a top 100 school for politics and international relations in the world rankings, and it ranks 8 in the UK. One of the great things about the School of Government and International Affairs is that it is a cosmopolitan community. So nearly half of the academic staff are international. They are from different countries. And we've got students from over 50 countries. Another great thing about the School of Government and International Affairs is the graduate employability. So it's basically ranked 7th in the UK for politics graduate prospects. So that means that if you study with us, you will have a lot of chances to find a potentially good job. Yeah, and what you should study at the School of Government and International Affairs. So I think that one of the great things about the school is the full substantive range that we offer in terms of international relations. So, we offer international relations with political theory. We also have the regional expertise. So for example, we have experts working in the Middle East. We have experts working in East Asia, for example. We also have some experts working on security and peace studies, migration. So you're going to be potentially exposed to all these experts that are working in different fields. Another great thing about the department is that you're going to be exposed to different methodological approaches and theoretical approaches to the study of politics and international relations. So for example, unlike some other universities in the UK, is that they are more specialized in sort of providing specific methodological approaches. We don't do that. So you're going to be exposed to multiple ideas about how global politics work. And I think this is great because by the time that you complete your degree, you're going to have, let's say, a toolkit to understand politics, right? Another great thing that about the department is actually that our programs, so the postgraduate programs, they are tied to research centers. And we have different research centers. So we have a research center, for China studies, for the Middle East, which is a very famous one. We also have a research center for conflict and peace studies. And I think this is great because then you're going to be able to participate in those centers and to talk to the experts and to sort of like to participate in the activities of those centers. Another cool thing about the department or why you should study at the School of Government is actually that the inclusive student-centered learning that we basically provide, that it's basically geared towards employment and further study. And I will give you like 3 examples of this. One is that you're going to be exposed to what we call authentic assessments. So for example, you will need to submit a policy report, for example, for some classes. You will also need to, for example, like record a podcast, or you see. So these assessments are kind of designed to ensure that when you leave SGIA, you will be able, and you will have the skills to be able to, to work in different jobs. Another example is that how actually this what we call the institutionalized student involvement at all the levels of the school. So, for example, if you have any problems, or if face any challenge, so then there's different channels where you will be able to be involved, and you will be able to be part of the community and raise your challenges, and you will be able to meet the scholars. We have those spaces where the students can raise their concerns and they can be part of the school. And also we have a broad range and SGIA-specific student support. So for example, we offer what we call the First Generation Scholars Network. This is a network of scholars and students that come from families that maybe their parents don't have like a student degree, and they are students who are the first generation that goes to university. So we have a network to sort of like to support those students. And then finally, another cool thing about SGIA is that actually we organize a lot of career and research focused events. So for example, like I think was it 2 months ago, we invited I think the Kuwait the ambassador from Kuwait to the UK. And also we have invited like different MPs from different political parties. And I think those events are great because you're going to be exposed to actually experts and people who are actually working in their field, but also you will be able to sort of like to chat with them, and they might be able to help you later on, to find jobs, or maybe they will be able to provide some advice on how you can sort of advance in your career. Okay, and here you have more information about the master's degrees that we offer at SGIA. I'm not gonna go through them, but here you have like the information. If you go to the website, you will be able to find this information. And if that's okay with you, sorry. And I'm gonna say basically like the seminar that you're going to experience today is gonna be like a 45-minute seminar. And it's a seminar that you could find potentially in one of these following courses. So either if you study the MA in International Relations, the MA in Politics and International Relations with Political Theory, or the MA in International Relations of East Asia, and then you take one of these courses, either the Politics of East Asia or maybe International Relations Theory, you might be able to experience like a seminar like the one that you're going to experience now. Okay. So the name of the seminar is the Revival of Civilization. Oh, sorry, I cannot see this. Sorry, give me a second. Of Civilization of Politics in the Era of Great Power Competition. And the main aims of this seminar are to basically understand and analyze the rise of what we call civilizational politics in contemporary world politics. And we're going to critically discuss some examples of contemporary civilizational politics, okay? So the structure of the seminar is for 10 minutes or so, I'm gonna talk about civilizational politics, so some concepts. Then we're gonna have a Q&A section about this idea of civilizational politics. And then in the last part of the seminar, we're going to do some critical discourse analysis of civilizational politics in world politics. So I'm going to show you like 3 videos, 3 speeches, and we're going to collectively analyze them, okay? So perhaps the first question for you is about, okay, so what do you know about civilizational politics? Anyone? So when you hear this word, civilizational politics, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Anyone? Have you heard of this concept before?
Maybe Samuel Huntington.
Great, yes. And what do you know about him?
I know he wrote a book about this question, and he created the civilizational conflicts, just like the Israel and other areas.
Mhm.
They have their history here, their tradition, and their patterns.
Mhm.
This is part of their civilization.
Mhm.
So
Great. Mhm.
I can't explain more specific.
No, that's fine. Great. Yes. Great. Fantastic. Yes. Anything else? What do you know about this idea of civilizational politics?
So, if I may speak,
Yeah, of course.
essentially, the very modus of civilizational politics is the question of identity that essentially comes interlinked with the question of civilizationalism. Also,
Mm-hmm.
something which we should essentially consider when we are going through this period of civilizational politics is how the interminglance of intersectionality essentially takes place through rather the questions of, let's say, communalism, especially in my country, when the question of Ram Mandir
Mm-hmm.
essentially is taking place, and also, of course, the Palestine-Israel conflict, which essentially is rather a transgression of what essentially took place in the question of, let's say, the cultural ages or the historical ages, and of course, let's say, concludingly, the identity-based ages. So essentially, anything that anything that essentially kind of affects the political discourse based upon the cultural identity or the historical identity may be essentially termed to be civilization politics, in my opinion, sir.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? What do you know about this idea of civilizational politics? No? Okay, so I want to brief you, I want to give you some concepts to think about these ideas of civilization. So the first concept that is very important is this idea of this what we call the civilizational state, right? Which basically claims to represent not only a particular nation or religion, but an exceptional civilization. And a clear example of this is China, right? So theoretically, when we think about world politics, we know that the main actors in world politics are the states, right? Or the nation states, right? But when we think about the idea of the civilizational state, then when we sort of understand world politics, then potentially we no longer see like a nation state as the main actor, but also a civilizational state. And for example, if you pay attention to the way how the Chinese government is talking about China, you will see how they imagine themselves as being a civilizational state, right? They talk about as if China was like a civilization. Then the second concept that is very important to understand civilizational identity is, sorry, the civilizational politics is the idea of civilizational identity, right? And this is basically like the highest form of cultural identity and the broadest assertion of a common collective identity. So for example, again, if you think about China, it's not about the fact that China has a specific, like a national identity, right? But also this idea that they have a civilizational identity, that this identity is linked to the fact that, China is a civilizational state. And we see this in different contexts. For example, also in India, in Turkey, but in the West as well, right? So increasingly, there's this idea that there's a collective West with a civilizational identity, that it revolves around ideas on Christianism and very specific understandings of religion, right? So I think these two concepts are quite useful to understand some elements that are shaping these ideas around civilizational politics. But then when we talk about specifically about civilizational politics. So what do we mean by civilizational politics? Because one thing is, you know, this idea of like the civilizational state, so how a state perceives itself as being a civilization and having a civilizational identity, which could be, you know, a religion or, you know, yeah, normally it's a religion. But when we talk about civilizational politics, we are talking about a very specific phenomenon that is emerging or has emerged since, I would say, since the 90s, but especially since the 2000s, right? And basically, the first way to understand civilizational politics is this idea of how states, international organizations, and non-state actors are increasingly talking and acting, this is important, as if they were civilizations. So we see how these states are no longer acting supposedly as nation states, but actually they are acting as if they were civilizations. So a prime example of this is, perhaps you haven't seen it, but Vladimir Putin's use of civilizational politics in the last Spotlight Club, where he was talking about how Russia was a civilizational state, right? So when a state leader, like a non-state actor, like a maybe think tank, or like an organization began to talk about civilizations, they are promoting like a certain form of civilizational politics, right? Because they are perceiving themselves as being a civilization or being part of a civilization. Then, another way to understand this idea of civilization is what they are basically used as a strategic frame of reference. So, for example, when Donald Trump, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, he gave a speech in Poland about how the West had to defend the Western civilization. He was providing like a frame of reference to act upon. So, for example, the idea that these states, that they are part of this collective West, they need to defend the Western civilization, right? And it's also a way to strategically think about how this defense should, you know, take place, right? Another way or another element that is tied to this idea of civilizational politics is that actually when, you know, like the state leaders or non-state actors like think tanks or foundations or maybe international organizations talk about civilizations, they also talk about civilizations as an organizing principle. So for example, a clear example of this is that when China, for example, is promoting this idea of the Global Civilization Initiative, the way how they are acting and, you know, arranging the institutions and practicing certain norms, they are also framed with these ideas about civilization, right? So we can see how civilizational politics can be a form of an organizing principle, sorry, to sort of like to arrange a certain sort or to promote certain social actions and to arrange certain international institutions and promote certain practices under the prism of being a civilization. Okay, do you have any questions about this? No? Okay. So we know that there has been this rise of civilizational politics, but I think it's important to understand the context in which the rise of civilizational politics took place, right? So first of all, these ideas about civilizational politics have been a form of discursive politics of contestation against the liberal international order and the context of great power competition. So for example, you know, now if you look at world politics now, if you pay attention to the way how the Russian state is talking about world politics, or Turkey, or to some extent India, or to some extent like China, for example. We see how they are using ideas about civilization to challenge the core norms and values that underpin the international liberal order. But not only they are doing that discursively, but also we see that in the context of this ongoing great power competition between, like the United States, the European Union, Russia, China, we see how all these state leaders, like the ministers of foreign affairs, they are increasingly using ideas around civilization to legitimize and justify certain policies to protect their national interests, right? So, and the second element that help us to understand this rise of civilizational politics is the effects of globalization after the end of the Cold War. And why? Because this globalization actually, or this neoliberal globalization, one of its effects was the homogenization of world politics, right? Especially the promotion of certain norms, values, and ideas about how the global economy should run and organize, and how states should conduct world politics, right? So in a context where all these ideas, or there was this homogenization of the spreading of homogenization, of ideas and norms and values, that created very ideological challenges to states like, for example, China, right? Because if you are China and you are operating within the context of globalization, then you have to sort of explain why, despite being involved in these processes, you are a different state that is not like the West or not like the US, right? So one way to do that was by using ideas about civilizational politics, right? And we can clearly see this, especially in the context of China, but also in the context of Russia, Turkey, and how these states, despite they were actively participating in these processes, they were saying, okay, we are part of the globalization, but we are different. We are not like the liberal West. We don't behave like them, right? And that's why they were using ideas about civilizational politics. And of course, another element that explains the rise of civilizational politics is a new wave of conservative discourses and the global far-right discourses. So for example, again, if you pay attention to the way how President Donald Trump was talking about world politics, you could see how he was using ideas about the Western civilization, ideas about protecting Christianity and protecting the West as a collective actor with a sort of like cohesive identity that revolves around sharing like a common religion, right? So these are the three elements or factors that help us to understand the rise of civilizational politics, right? So the contestation against the international liberal order and great power competition, the effects of globalization after the end of the Cold War, and this new wave of conservative and global far-right discourses. Okay, do you have any questions about this? No? Okay, so I'll move to the next. So then the question for you now is whether, so do you think that based on what you have learned like now, do you think this concept of civilizational politics can be useful for understanding contemporary world politics? Why and why not? What do you think of this? Do you think it's a useful concept?
I would say it's hard to say that it's not a useful concept. I think it's pretty clear that it's important to understand civilization and as a way to understand how we interact with each other, because of the way of how other civilizations work and decide how they're running. It depends if we're able to necessarily feel inclined to work with them. I think the reading we did, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but just talking about the idea of like Trump's Muslim ban and Huntington's idea of like, oh, the West is right, but for the rest, it's imperialism. It creates this kind of divide. And we could kind of look at that and understand that through this kind of idea.
Great, fantastic. Anyone else? What do you think of this concept? Do you think it's kind of useful to understand contemporary world politics? Okay, second question for you. So what are the potential problems of understanding world politics through ideas around civilization? What are the problems? So when you think, for example, of the leaders like Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump or Xi Jinping, when they sort of promote these ideas about civilization, how we could criticize them? What are the kind of problems of doing that?
So if I may answer.
Yeah, of course, yes.
So if you're talking about the concept of civilizational politics, I think that the question of identity, or the question of, let's say, especially talking about countries, especially in the South Asia, and the cultures, or the let's say the secularistic diversity that essentially propounds among them, I think it's very important to understand the dynamics that essentially it would ensue in the psychological perspectives of people. And that psychological perspective was definitely let's say, influence the political discourse that was essentially take forth, be it from the very fundamental voters bank to the position of the prime minister or the position of the president, based upon the constitutional validity of the same. So yeah, that's what I essentially feel. It definitely does make sense to put forth civilizational politics, of course, in a regional sense, or on a regional purview, definitely, yeah.
Right, thank you so much. Right. Anyone else? What are the problems of using this idea of civilizations in the political discourse, as a political discourse? Do you know the word exceptionalism? Have you heard of this word before?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So maybe for those of you who don't know, it's the idea of, so that when, for example, like a leader or like a minister of foreign affairs is using these ideas around civilization, they are promoting like a discourse that is depicting this state as an exceptional state with an exceptional history, meaning that they are special, that that they are different to other states, right? And actually, like of course, like there's different states with different traditions, different cultures, and all of that. But what is important to understand here is that actually, for example, if you think about the West, for example, or Europe, right? We cannot understand Europe without these transnational connections that go beyond the West, right? And that challenges exceptionalist discourses around the West, right? Because the thing is that we cannot understand the West without its connections with other parts of the world, right? Or the same goes for China, right? When we think of China, you cannot understand China or modern China without understanding its connections with other states. For example, Imperial Japan, the Soviet Union, or even the United States, right? After the 70s. And modern China is a combination of all these connections, right? So that's why I think that when like people talk or use ideas about civilizations, we have to be a little bit careful, because I think we need to sort of like try to de-exceptionalize these states, right? The second problem, in my opinion, with these ideas about civilizational politics is that normally they tend to provide a quite monolithic understanding of these states, right? Again, if you think about, China, for example, China is not a monolithic state. Of course, there's the Communist Party and the government, but within government, the state is the way how it works is very complex. There's different levels of governance. People think differently about how the state should run. Even within China, there's different people who think differently about, the state, world politics. So there's no monolithic China. The same goes for, I don't know, states like India or Turkey or or the European Union, right? So when you pay attention, when you sort of like try to understand how these political formations work, then you realize that actually they're very complex and they are not monolithic, right? And I think the danger of using civilizational politics is to promote these monolithic understandings of these actors, right? And that creates many problems, right? Especially policy problems, right? Because then if you understand like Russia or China or even like the West as a monolithic actor, then you are more restrained and constrained with the potential policies that you can sort of like envision to deal with those states. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so now we're going to do an activity and let me see if we can do it. So if that's okay with you, can you all open your YouTube? Because I think it might be best if I send you the links through the chat. And what we can do is that maybe we can watch these three videos. They are like three speeches. One is a conversation between actually Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. The second is a speech that Donald Trump gave maybe like some years ago in Poland. And the third is a speech by President Erdogan of Turkey. And maybe I can send you the links. You can watch them. I'm gonna give you around 5-6 minutes to watch them. And then we can discuss them, okay? Is that okay? Okay. Have you managed to watch these two videos? Yeah. So maybe if yes, we can start with the first one, like the conversation between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. What can you tell me about the conversation?
So may I speak?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So basically, of course, as we looked at the conversation between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, the reference to being descendants of the dragon is very deeply rooted in Chinese civilization, right? So it essentially symbolizes the continuity with ancient traditions and cultural pride, and essentially it also aligns with what essentially China's narrative of a continuous civilization is, and the political implications that essentially it would have is that Jinping essentially asserts China's unique civilization standing, and at the same time, it also puts forward its historical legitimacy, right? So at the same time, so it's essentially putting forth the power to the message to the Western power upon the interconnectedness of the historical legitimacy, and at the same time, that kind of is rather a bleak or a small message to essentially put the fact out to Trump that the national unity is strong, and the something which is essentially called soft power, and that is something which is coming into play in this context, as far as I did cognize.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Right. Yeah. Anyone else? What did you think about this video? What do you think is happening there? No. Okay. Yes, Dante, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think to an extent there's being a lot of emphasis put on just the idea of cultures or civilizations kind of being around for so long and having this sort of legacy, and you can kind of notice that and see like how that might be hurtful to how we discuss civilization, politics, especially almost reductive in how we can recognize where those civilizations are now if we're so focused on how long they've been alive or existed.
Fantastic, great, thank you so much. Okay, and what about Donald Trump's speech where he talks about that Western civilization is under threat?
Yeah, so I guess with that, you can speak about reductive, as I just mentioned there, and this is reductive in another level of, and even talked about in the reading a bit, but this idea that Western civilization is fully the right option. And I know in the slides there's mention about like the far right movement, and we are seeing this push from Western civilizations. You can even talk about like England's move with Brexit being an idea of this defense of the Western civilization being under threat, but it's really creating a this and them that could potentially make it harder for a world unity because both sides are pushing back where maybe there doesn't need to be that.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Dante. Anyone else? What did you think about Donald Trump's speech about Western civilization is under threat? No? Okay, so we're going to move to analyze some photos that I collected. Okay, the first photo on the top left is basically Erdogan and his wife. So basically, maybe you might not know about Turkish politics, but what's happening here is related to today's topic on civilizational politics. So behind President Erdogan and his wife, what we see is like a soldiers that are representing Ottoman soldiers, right? And I think it's very interesting to see how in a context where like President Erdogan, and I think no, this was actually the centenary of the Turkish Republic. He basically gave a speech, and behind him he had soldiers that were kind of depicting Ottoman soldiers. So, and I think the reason why he was doing that is basically to kind of like create a narrative that there's a continuation between Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. Also, he wanted to portray this idea about the military centrality of Turkey in world politics, right? Because the Ottoman Empire was a very powerful empire. And basically, if you pay attention to what Erdogan wants to do and his ideas about the neo-Ottomanism, where he wants to supposedly revive the Ottoman Empire, right? So he's using these ideas about civilization and imaginaries about civilization to actually legitimize his policies in the context of, the centenary of the Turkish Republic, right? Okay. This, if you pay attention to, if you check this highlight about Trump's Warsaw speech beats Western wall against barbarians at the gates, I took this from The Guardian. What's going on there?
So I'm not sure, but it's like it says Trump's speech is othering the rest of the world as lower than the West. Like yeah, so it's like a dialogue in the text, right? Yeah.
Yes. Anyone else? What do you think of this? Sorry.
So if I may, as far as I remember here through this particular speech, I think Donald Trump mentioned the word civilization umpteen amounts of times through the speech, and also he pledged his support for the NATO through this particular speech that he made in Poland, which is essentially kind of shows us the dynamics that he's trying to essentially approach by having a certain speech about the fears of the Western world in a country like Poland, which does have a particular a questionable history in itself. So I feel that that could be one of my viewpoints of looking at this.
I think one of the key concepts that one of your colleagues just mentioned now is the idea of othering. I think I really like that concept. So basically, he's othering like the non-Western people, right? So how he's creating this mental imaginary where the West is confronting like a non-Western people, and actually he calls them the barbarians, right, at the gates. And actually, he's using a very powerful memory, historical memory of when the Mongol Empire attempted to conquer Europe and they stopped at the gates of Vienna. So you can see how actually he's using these civilizational discourses and imaginaries to actually to talk about the supposed danger that the West is experiencing and how there's this non-Western world that is kind of confronting like the West, right? So these are very powerful like way to put it, and quite racist as well. And also, yeah, what about the last, let's like the sequel, like he says here, like the cultural mission in the new era are to further advance cultural prosperity, to build a leading country in culture, and to foster modern Chinese civilization. And this is part of a speech that he gave in Beijing in 2023. Who is the audience of this message? Do you think he's talking to an international audience, or do you think he's talking to a domestic audience?
I think it's a domestic audience as per, I think so.
And why do you think he's talking to a domestic audience?
Preliminarily, right off the bat, it's in Beijing, first of all, and second of all, again, it's I think the very dynamic of the way he's speaking about how the Chinese civilization needs to be protected, and at the same time, the culture is essentially being put forward, right? So that in itself kind of seems to me as to a reason why it's a domestic gathering, because of course, ideally, there would be a shift towards an international perspective when we would essentially address an international audience in question. Just like if you look at the speech that was the conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping, where he essentially put forward rather a very shallowistic purview of what essentially is the history of China and the culture of China. But over here, this quote rather is a rather deep insight into what the objectives of the Chinese government should essentially be, more or less.
Fantastic. Anyone else? I think the importance of this speech, actually, this part of this speech is actually, as you can see here, civilizational politics are not only promoted to discuss world politics and to promote certain policies and legitimize certain policies in world politics, but increasingly we see how different governments are using civilizational politics to also legitimize and justify certain domestic policies. This is a case of China. Right? So there's this idea where the government is internally promoting the idea that, that China is a civilization. We need to protect its culture and to protect that civilization. So he's talking to a domestic audience. But also, again, if you pay attention to the photo of President Erdogan, the same. He was actually giving a speech in front of a huge crowd. I think it was in Istanbul, or I think it was in Istanbul, and he was also using these imaginaries about civilization, the Ottoman Empire, and the power of the Ottoman Empire in front of a domestic audience that was very nationalist to actually defend its project and also its foreign policy. So we can see how actually the power of the civilizational politics, right? That they are not only reproduced in on the context of world politics, but also in the context of domestic politics. Okay, So just to conclude today's session, I think civilizational politics is increasingly becoming an important factor in shaping contemporary world politics. Of course, we need to always be critical about these ideas, but the fact is that increasingly many or different governments, they are using ideas about civilizations. And also we can see how these civilizational politics, they serve as a discourse to either legitimize new forms of great power competition, contest the international order, and also we see how increasingly there's a new wave of neoconservatism and the global far right that they are using ideas of civilization. Okay, do you have any questions about today's seminar? So if you don't have any questions, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna leave here. No, actually, in the PowerPoint, you will see that there's a last here. This is the email address of the department. So if you have any questions, or you can just drop them an email, and they will be able to help you with your questions, or they will be able to redirect you to the right person that will be able to help you. So thank you so much for joining this seminar. Actually, it was very nice to talk to you. You did very, very, very well. And yes, if you have any questions, just contact my colleagues at the admin team. And hopefully I will see you next year at Durham. And I hope you have a nice summer. Take care. Bye-bye.